Hello. Welcome to Take Warning with Jake Warren. I'm your host, Jake Warren. This is the third episode of the show. Sorry it's taken me so long to get this third episode out. Second episode, of course, was all about mixed martial arts, my love for martial arts movies growing up, and of course the concern that we've had with, that we're always going to have about people being involved in sports that are subject to or can cause head injury on a fairly regular basis. I mean, when you're involved in hitting someone in the head constantly, that's something that you have to be very, very concerned about. So we're talking about the right ways for young people to get involved in boxing and mixed martial arts and things like that. And ultimately, the final answer on that was there should be no contact, no real striking contact until a person is well into their teens. And I fully agree with that. So all sorts of other options for young martial artists or people who are interested in training at a young age. Parents, if you want to get your kids involved in mixed martial arts or karate or boxing or whatever, there's right ways to do it. So have a listen to that last episode. So this episode, we're podcasting today. It's Monday, August 28th, final days of summer, which has been a scorcher here in Victoria. It's a beautiful summer. Of course, that can be a lot of problems with fires. It seems to be something that happens almost every year now. And it's devastating. Episode 3, what the hell are we talking about? Well, we're talking more about movies. Huge part of my life. I love movies. Anybody who knows me well knows that I spend a lot of time watching movies, talking about movies. I also work in the film industry. The movies I end up working on generally are nothing like the movies I'm interested in my private life, my personal interests. But just a little backstory about why I love movies so much. And even before I get into that, I will say we are, the guest today on the show is Jason Bourque, an old friend who is, in my opinion, the perfect example of a Canadian independent filmmaker who's got his fingers in all sorts of pots. He is writing, he's producing, he's directing, and he is making movies. He's made all sorts of different films over the years, a lot of action films, a lot of sci-fi stuff, and he's working on some really interesting projects right now. Just finished a film called Drone, starring Sean Bean, which, check it out. It's available out there. You can download it on iTunes. It had some theatrical release in the United States. This is a great calling card for him, and I'm really proud of him for following his dream and realizing it, because he is a working film director who's working on constant new projects, and he's looking to the future, and he's only in his early 40s, so he's got such a great career ahead of him. Really proud of Jason Bourque. So that interview is coming up in a little bit, but a little bit backstory and a walk down memory lane, I guess, a little introduction into why I love movies so much. I have to thank my father for that. It was Christmas 1978, I believe. Star Wars was still in the theater. It had been in the theater for almost a year or more. And my dad and I were visiting his parents in Edmonton. It was 15 below. Hadn't gone outside in a while. Guess my dad was getting a little stir crazy. He likes movies. He's always liked movies. Doesn't talk about him a lot, but put him in front of a TV with a decent film, and he'll get right into it. So I remember he's had the paper laying out on the floor of the living room, and I remember him saying, do you want to go see this movie, Star Wars? And I think my first reaction was war film. Didn't really want to see a big shoot 'em up war film. But my dad convinced me that it was something that kids would like. And, there was some cool creatures or something in it. I don't know how he got me interested in it, but he did. I remember walking to the theater, the Meadowlark Mall Theater, and we saw the film. And I think from the first seconds, the Star Wars didn't have opening credits. It just went right into that incredible music incredible opening shot, and boom, all this explosions and droids and fuck, man, it was so incredible. You know what I'm talking about. Any film fan, any fan of Star Wars knows when those moments happen, those first moments of that film, we were captured. We were under the spell, and I left that theater with just an entirely new appreciation of not only films, but of what we could see on the screen. And of course, being a kid, I was just so jazzed. I had to have the action figures. I had to have the sheets. I had to have all of the toys. I had to have all that stuff. And they didn't buy me everything. That's for sure. My dad and my mom did not buy me all of that junk, plastic and stuff. For the most part, I just, a couple action figures or whatever. And that's all I really got. But, in the years to come, I can remember in the basement of my grandparents' house there in Edmonton, forcing my cousins and the rest of my family to sort of play different roles in a basement recreation of Star Wars. And then a few years later, we did it again for Empire Strikes Back. And my grandfather, Jack, God bless him, wonderful man. He's of course he's not with us anymore. He passed away a few years ago. He got to play Obi-Wan, and he refused to get up off the couch. So I had to bring the scene to him. I was, of course, playing all the important male lead characters. I was Luke Skywalker in that scene, and that was the scene where, they're chatting about he's gone to find Obi-Wan, and he wants him to come with him and go on this adventure. And that's my grandfather's scene. He nailed it. And then he fell asleep. He went back to sleep for a little while, and we continued with the production. But that's how fucking jazzed I was interested in and excited about Star Wars. And then it just continued. I was absolutely passionate about any movie that I could see. And I lived with my father. This is crazy what we would let our kids do in the 1970s. I lived with my father in grade 2, grade 3 in Vancouver. We lived West 11th by City Hall. And this is the epitome of a latchkey kid. My dad drove taxi at this time. He was letting it all hang out. He was a pretty laid back dude back then. And I vividly remember taking a couple of bucks from my dad and saying, yeah, I'm going to go see a movie. He was like, okay, what are you going to go see? And I was allowed to walk through the City Hall kind of grounds, come out onto Cambie, and then walk across the bridge into downtown Vancouver and go see a movie at the Capitol 6 Theater all by myself. And that was 1979, 1980, I guess. So I was 8 and 9 years old. I don't know how many 8 or 9-year-olds these days are walking through the streets of Vancouver by themselves with their parents' permission, of course. But I went and saw everything. I went and saw so many movies at the Capitol 6 over the next few years. My dad would take me to see films as well. We went and saw The Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We went and saw Excalibur, which is a pretty adult film. All sorts of really challenging films for a young kid. But another one that I remember, and it's kind of funny, is, where the fuck were child services when this was going on? He took me to see Lawrence of Arabia. I was 10 years old. At the intermission, when I woke up, he woke me up, and it was like, okay, well, we just have to go outside for a little while, and then we got to come back in for another 2.5 hours. And I remember most of the film. Of course, I saw it a few times over the years afterwards, but as a teenager and as an adult. But you're taking your 9-year-old, your 10-year-old son to see a 4-hour-long movie. It's pretty heavy-duty subject matter. It's not really for kids by any means, but that was the sort of bar he set, and I think it really pushed me to seek out movies, to be interested in them, to know what good movies were and what bad movies were. And then, of course, the ultimate for me in I can't remember what year it was. I'd have to look it up. Here, let's look it up. I went and saw Meatballs. the greatest film ever made about camp, starring Bill Murray, which is actually a Canadian film. And this is what the show is about today with Jason, the interview I have with Jason Bourque. We discuss why aren't there more Canadian movies being made that Canadians are interested in. Why don't we go, historically, why don't Canadians go to movies about Canadians that are set in Canada? It's a Canadian story. Why don't we support that industry? Why aren't there more movies being made here domestically that we're excited about, that we see advertised properly, and then we go out and support the Canadian industry, the Canadian film industry? It just doesn't work that way. French-speaking Canadians in Quebec, they have a wonderful, thriving industry that supports itself. They have great directors, writers, producers that are making content for French-speaking Canada, and they do well at the box office. That French-speaking Canadians go out and see these movies in Quebec and Montreal and all over the province. They go and see the movies. We don't go and see these Canadian movies. I didn't see Men with Brooms. I didn't see Good Cop, Bad Cop, or Bon Cop, Bad Cop. I didn't see the only movie I can say, honestly, that I ever saw, a Canadian film, in the last 25 years that I went to a theater to see. Well, I went and saw Crash with Cronenberg. I went and saw that. So I have to add that to the list. What I was going to say, the only one I've ever seen in the last 25 years was Hardcore Logo. I went and saw that with my buddy John. We were living in Vancouver at the time. We played in a band, and it was like, hey, there's this movie about Canadian punk rockers with a great soundtrack, and it looks like they go on tour and everything. That was interesting to us, so we went and saw that. But why don't we go more often? And why aren't there more movies being made here in Canada that are unapologetically Canadian films that don't have to do with fucking hockey or curling or fucking ice or snow? Can we just make a movie that's really cool, that just happens to be set in Canada? So we talk about that with Jason Bourque, and that's what we're going to get into in a few minutes. And we talk about Meatballs, and we have a little bit of a trivia where we look at some of the Canadian movies over the years that actually are Canadian films that did well domestically, that did well in the United States and potentially internationally, but they were sort of hidden as Canadian films. Meatballs takes place, apparently, the story takes place at an American summer camp, a sleepaway camp. All the characters are expected to be American, and I think they even talk about it. It's Chicago. I think they're close to Chicago. It's eastern United States somewhere. But that movie did well. And it's actually a full-on Canadian movie, and it's one of the top-grossing Canadian films of all time. And that was made in the 1970s. Let's see what year it came out. 1979. So it was released in 1979, and it's a fully Canadian film. The director, Ivan Reitman, screenplay by Harold Ramis, who of course was of SCTV fame. But yeah, just a real quick thing here about Meatballs, the Canadian comedy that launched Bill Murray's film career. Yeah, so it's a Canadian film completely, and it really did launch his career. So it's a perfect example. If you've never seen Meatballs, you got a problem. Maybe you're just too serious. I don't know. Go check out Meatballs and watch more Canadian films. Do your best to get out there and to and try and see as many Canadian films as you can, and support the industry. The Vancouver film industry, of course, is thriving, but if you know anything about it, you'll know that 90% of it is all American productions. These are all American projects that we're working on. But it's great for the Canadian industry, and for the people like myself who work in the industry. If it wasn't for the American market, we wouldn't really be working up here as much as we are, which is absolutely insanely busy right now, the film industry. So if you're looking for an industry to get involved in, that might be a good one, certainly for the next foreseeable future. So thank you so much for listening to this intro. This is Take Warning with Jake Warren, episode 3, talking about Canadian film with my good friend, Jason Bourque. why don't we just start with a little update? Because you've just come back from a film festival, Michael Moore's Film Festival.
Yes.
And you also were recently, you were at another, of course, the premiere of Drone.
Yes.
Right? So this last few months has been insanely busy for you. Tell me about it.
Well, it's interesting how it works, because television is certainly something that a lot of people are focusing on right now. So I ended up getting a gig in the Middle East, working in Qatar for about 4 months, and working on the world's first Arabic-English sci-fi series called Medina, with a Qatari filmmaker and showrunner, Ahmed Baker. So he was able to take me on. We ended up working there for 4 months. So what we just did was premiere the first episode, directed by Wayne Rose from Battlestar Galactica. I ended up doing the 2 episodes 3 and 4. We just premiered it at Comic-Con. So it has been busy. So
right, I saw some great photos of you down at Comic-Con.
It was a blast. So that was a big thing. It's the first time I've worked on an international sci-fi series, and I can honestly say it's groundbreaking. It's just never been done. And we had over 20 countries working on it. We had an Iraqi pop star we had a Bahrain comedian who's kind of like the Russell Peters of the Middle East. And again, we had some U.S. actors came out, Natasha Henstridge and Eric Roberts, but it was quite the amazing ensemble. So the crew was mostly, we had everybody. We had a Thai lighting team, Hungarian AD team, Romanians and Bulgarians in the camera crew. So we got it done, 7 episodes, premiered the first one at Comic-Con, came back for a day, and then took off to Michael Moore's Traverse City Film Festival, where we had Drone, my latest feature, which had a theatrical in the U.S., and it just came out on iTunes and Amazon and all the platforms, starring Sean Bean and Mary McCormick, Joel David Moore, and our very own Patrick Sabongui, who kind of stole the show, to be honest. He was fantastic. Local actor, love to work with him. He's based out of Vancouver, and he's a very good friend. So, it has been a little bit of a whirlwind since I got back from Qatar. It's been a lot of little trips, also spending some time with my wife and the 2 pugs.
Awesome.
Because, again, I was gone for quite a long time in the Middle East.
I don't even know where to start with all of that. I mean, for me, it just sounds so incredibly exciting. And having worked in the industry a little bit, my first thought when you're talking about all of the different countries and people involved from different countries working on a project that big, what were some of the biggest challenges? I mean, the communication issue alone, was that a huge challenge for you on a day-to-day basis?
It's funny. It's only been lately, and Drone. I've done some shooting in India where I had to have some translators. When I was working on Drone, we shot a little bit in India where I had to work with a Bollywood cast. Some of them didn't speak very good English, so I also had a translator. Definitely needed that in the Middle East. I mean, for the most part, people spoke English, but we literally had half of these scripts in Arabic. Which is, again, it's fascinating. I had a translator. The showrunner was helping me with it. It's interesting, though, because when you take the language out, you can still focus on, obviously, performance and the nuance of the scene. So there's certain things that I can still judge, obviously, and especially when it comes to the emotion of that scene and just getting from point A to point B without actually understanding what they're saying.
Sure.
But the body language sells it. So that, for me, is actually quite fascinating. So still able to direct them and again, had wonderful scenes. One of the actors we were working with, Hisham Swar, is from Palestinian actor, award-winning guy. He was great at ad-libbing. So that's where it gets a little more fun when you start to ad-lib and it's in Arabic. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Qatar, we were filming his scene in Nobu, which is also in Qatar. Of course, Nobu, you can find it's the most awesome restaurant. It's international. I think De Niro is one of the owners of it.
Wow.
So it's so we had a wonderful scene with Hisham, who, funny enough, actually, it's such a small world. I was in Traverse City, saw an amazing movie called 42 Junction, which was filmed in Palestine, funded. It was Palestinian and Israeli finance. You would love this, by the way. It's about two musicians, and he's a rapper. His girlfriend is also a musician, and they're just doing some incredible music, and it's sort of a day in their life. And Hisham was working on it. So to be in Traverse City talking about, hey, it's talking to these awesome actors that were actually coached by the guy that I just worked with in Qatar. It just really gets a sense of what a small world.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And I'm, a little bit out of it. Traverse City, where's Traverse City?
You know what? I actually have been told it's like it's one of these best kept secrets in the U.S. for vacationing. It's on Lake Michigan. Beautiful, beautiful little town. A lot of retirees. The most amazing theaters I've ever seen. The State Theater there is fantastic. It's one of the top 10 places, I think, voted by like Time Magazine to see a movie. It's just a wonderful, wonderful town. I actually had, I would say, my best experience from a festival perspective. I came home with a swag bag, and my wife couldn't believe it. Like, we actually had like sparkling wine that was made specifically for the festival that was all labeled up, and the T-shirts and the hats and the cherries. It's actually the cherry capital of North America.
The cherry capital.
Yeah, but that said, on the board of directors, you got Michael Moore, and you also have Jeff Daniels, and also the founder of Rage Against the Machine.
What?
And yeah, I know, and some of these, it's just this really awesome mix. It's amazing how many A-listers actually come from Michigan, and they give their love to this amazing festival that, again, I think it should be on everybody's list because it was an incredible trip. Everybody was international. I think there's only 2 Canadians. And then we had directors, filmmakers that were flown in from Spain, France, Israel. It was phenomenal.
Is there a vibe to that film festival that's a little different than, say, like you've been to Sundance, Telluride? Have you been to those at all?
Yeah, from a festival perspective, this one was not about industry. It was about just showing really great movies, and it's a vibe that I would say is more akin to, say, maybe the Vancouver Film Festival, where they can there's no like red carpet. I mean, maybe they got a little bit of that at Vancouver, but Traverse City was very much about the movies and the audience, and so it's. And also to take care of the filmmakers. So I've never been to a film festival where I got like sailboating lessons, by the ex-mayor takes us out. And then there's a catamaran where I'm hanging out with Leonard Maltin and his daughter. It's like
Leonard Maltin just shows up out of nowhere. What was Leonard Maltin doing at this thing? What's he doing there?
Yeah, he does these awesome podcasts with his his kick-ass daughter who handles all his social media. Guilford Godfrey was there hanging out. It was just like a very interesting crowd, and we just all had a blast.
I want to party with Guilford Godfrey and the lead singer of Rage Against the Machine in Traverse City with the mayor on a boat trip with sparkling wine. I don't know, man. It sounds what?
Debauchery would bound to be happen, but it's So anyway, so I loved it. So I just got back. I'm currently I'm back editing the 4th episode of Medina, the Middle East series. I'm doing that remotely, working with the showrunner, and also nailing down the visual effects and the music for episode 3. And also I started editing. I worked on an episode of a Netflix series called The Hollow. So I was brought on board to do some of the live action that's animated, but I was doing some live action sequences for that. So I start that on Wednesday. So it's good. And then looking around, in development on quite a few projects. I would love to keep going on features. I've been the television movie market, as we know, is quite hopping, and I love working in that genre. But I certainly prefer features when I get the opportunity. Features, as we know, just take a whole lot longer. Drone took it took like 5 years to finally get that one completed.
Wow.
I got Sean Bean based on Blackfly, which he loved a lot. And Blackfly, man, I wrote that script back in '96.
Wow.
And again, I finally filmed that one in 2014. So the passion projects can certainly take a long time. So I'm hoping to speed that process up a little bit.
Yeah.
That would be my plan.
I did a bit of research on help me pronounce it. I wanted to say Medina, but it's Medina.
Yeah.
Medina.
Yes.
The synopsis, I just before we started chatting, I browsed that real quick. I was a little unclear. I know that it has something to do. The protagonists. They're all in a cave. Give us a breakdown on the story of that series, and not only why it's so groundbreaking, obviously because it's where it's being shot and who's working on it, but what's the story about?
It's the quick pitch. It's Homeland meets Lost. So so the idea being that there's a rocket launch in Qatar, more because of environmental issues, but it's been sabotaged, and it causes an explosion that we think, again, it's kind of up in the air for that first episode, that it's essentially opened some kind of a doorway into an alternate dimension. Where these 12 people, the survivors of the explosion, have now been transported. So it's very much a lot of like deep desert shooting, lots of characters with secrets. We do have creatures that are now part of it as well, and they start to realize that they're no longer in Qatar. They think they're in the deep desert. And it's obviously a much bigger, complex world that they're now in, where you do have Bedouins with swords on horses, demons, elements, which is what sets it apart. It's funny, like Rolling Stone said it was it was on their top 25 list of things to see at Comic-Con, and it has cultural elements that we just haven't seen before. To give you an example, like it's called the Tower of Silence, and we built a big set piece of that in Comic-Con. The Tower of Silence goes back to an actual religion where if someone dies, you can't desecrate the ground by burying the bodies, because that's where you grow stuff, you grow vegetables. So instead, the body's taken to a tower, and basically they just fill the tower with the dead so the crows can feed on them. A crazy visual, obviously not something we've ever seen in North American culture, and that's one of these cool kind of centerpieces that's been worked in, much like the jinn in the Middle East. It's kind of like this smoke demon. Sure. Here, it's fully embraced. It's not something that we've seen in any of our sci-fi shows. Yeah. Also, the Jathum, it's a demon that kind of sits on your chest and feeds on your fear and can paralyze you at night. And it's one of these things that, again, very prevalent in mythology in the Middle East, but it's not something that we're used to seeing. So it totally sets it apart from anything that I've ever worked on. Wow,
it sounds incredible. So many layers. Rolling Stone giving it a big, let's check this out. That's huge. That's massive. And groundbreaking in so many different areas. Congratulations on being part of that project. That must feel great. And you're still working on it. And do you feel like you're going to work on multiple episodes, or because I know
we're talking about it. Yeah. As it stands now, the big premiere was at Comic-Con, and they do things differently. So with Qatar, the way they worked it was, let's showcase this. It was financed through Qatar. It's not something that needed a broadcaster, but now they can say, "Hey, listen, let's see what Netflix is saying. Let's see what Hulu is saying." So those negotiations have now started up. Nice. But the premiere was literally just for Comic-Con, for the people, essentially, to show off that first episode, and also an introduction of the characters. We had a full panel of my God, we had so many of the actors show up, braving the Trump travel ban, and because we had them from throughout the Middle East.
Wow,
it was
unique too, isn't it?
Hey, some of them couldn't make it to Traverse City because of the travel ban. Some filmmakers. So it's just one of these things that it does impact a little bit right now when being a creative from some of those countries that are on the list.
What a weird. I don't know, man. I just shake my head, and It just baffles me how
We
we
don't
got
want to
to
be
this.
political about it, but it's the reality of those festivals.
Exactly.
It was definitely something that we were all thinking about.
Yeah.
But the one in Comic-Con, it went off without a hitch. Like it was,
Yeah.
we showed it in one of their biggest ballrooms to 4,000 people. So
Awesome.
it's wonderful that we had that interest.
Anything that stands out from the Comic-Con side of things? Just, was that your first time ever at that gathering?
I've always been working, so I've never had that opportunity. But with this type of a premiere, and I just had to go. It's funny. It's such a bizarre place. Like I had a half hour. I snuck into Sharknado 5, the panel. Fabio is playing the Pope. You know, I had to do a little clip of that.
Totally makes sense to me that Fabio would play the Pope. Yeah. I mean, it's perfect casting.
Chris Kattan, who I haven't seen that guy in like 20 years from Saturday Night Live, he's playing the Prime Minister of the UK. You know, it's just like this bizarre cast of fun people. So I don't know. I mean, you know, I lost some brain cells, but I certainly enjoyed checking out that panel. Otherwise, it was mostly work for me. I had a lot of meetings. And I was just part of that Medina crowd as we were there to support it.
Right on. Wow. Sharknado 5.
I think they had a tagline, let's make America bait again, which I thought was quite funny.
It was bait before, was it?
Let's make America bait again instead of great again. I cringed. Yeah, so it's gone global. Sharknado's gone global. It's not a movie I would ever enjoy directing.
No, Sharknado, the series is, I mean, it's just incredible. I was laughing with my girlfriend this morning a little bit. I was going down, I said, you know, Jason's been involved in some really, really serious projects. He's been involved in, you know, features. He's done TV. He's done, look at all this stuff. I don't know if I should even go near the NATO stuff, the Sharknado, but in your mind, what would be the most terrifying tornado? Okay, so we've seen tornadoes that picked up sharks, and flown, like, because the tornado touched down on water and picked up a bunch of sharks, and now it's flying inland and throwing huge sharks at people, right? Mm-hmm. Then is there anything scarier than that? I mean,
oh, I'm obsessed with pugs. Pugnado kind of came to mind at one point. You know, I got 2 pugs, Georgie and Frankie. You know, they're not as scary, but right. Someone made a little trailer called Planet of the Pugs with all these pugs kind of chasing this guy, and they took that voice of the guy from the Tim Burton one who said, like, bow your head, and gave it to this one, you know, black pug, and it was just hilarious. Awesome. So Pugnado kind of comes to mind.
Pugnado, I think there's a future for that.
Yeah, I'm thinking. It's funny, like, as you know, I was in Victoria shooting Stonados, which is probably the as far as like titles go, it's probably the lowest point. Even though I had a blast making it and it was wonderful shooting Victoria, but that was a pretty silly title, obviously.
When was that?
For Sci-Fi Channel.
On the Sci-Fi Channel, yes. When was that? When did you shoot that?
I shot Stonados back, I think it was like 2013, or 2014.
Shit, man. Next time you come to Victoria and do something like that, or anytime, please get me on your crew, because
It was epic. We shot it downtown Victoria. We played it for Boston. The entire harbor gets taken out by giant Stonados throwing out exploding rocks. We made it seem like an apocalypse. Like we had, I even had like a minefield because these rocks, they kind of shake and then explode.
Yeah.
And so we created a minefield down a few of the alleyways where, you know, they have to like, again, these things were just exploding everywhere. Lots of shrapnel. We took out Fisgard, the lighthouse. That got hit. That took out the Smoking Man, the guy from X-Files. He got squashed. It was pretty awesome, and it was all done in Victoria, the entire thing.
Where did you do your CGI and that kind of stuff? Was that all done here too, or was that Vancouver?
That was done through Encore in Vancouver. So they did a wonderful job. You know, again, like some of these sci-fi movies, the visual effects can sometimes be the lowest point because they got like, you know, not a lot of money. You know, They got to do like 150 visual effects shots, and sometimes the quality, can kind of dip. Much like Sharknado. I mean, you look at Sharknado; they're not exactly great looking CGI on those sharks. But again, it's all part of the fun. And Stonados was definitely a fun movie.
I laughed at the beginning when I saw Sharknado 1, the ad for it, and I laughed at a lot of these films. They're just so over the top and completely unbelievable, and you wonder how this shit gets made. But there is a big industry out there for lower budget, straight to video, straight to television, being made by these digital or specialty channels like Sci-Fi. They create their own content. It is what it is. And then, am I right? They sell that a lot to other. They license the shit out of it.
They do. The market is global. So when I do a movie like Stonados and a couple years down the road, I start to get my residual checks, which is like, oh, great, I got like $1.50 from Poland, or I got like, $10 from Spain. It's movies like that sell to mostly every country. They're pretty safe. The Sci-Fi Channel disaster movies, especially when they have a family element, which most of them do, it becomes something that can be seen anytime during the day in any country. And again, they make their money and they entertain a lot of people. Yeah. It's hard, of course, being a filmmaker when it comes to IMDb, because the scores that these movies get, it's like there's still people that somehow compare it to a Roland Emmerich, $250 million movie when my budget's like 1.2.
Yeah.
But, it's all part of the charm. You sort of become like Teflon when it comes to some of those reviews when they come out. The next decade hopefully will be the golden years, knock on wood. I'm still an indie filmmaker, so it's not like I work on like Van Helsing, or I work on these bigger TV series. It's great that I got the opportunity to do something bigger than those, something that's international and with more scope. But that being said, it's a very interesting market. I still find I'm still writing a lot of spec scripts. Still out there hitting the pavement, creating new relationships with producers. Drone has opened doors. But I'm also at a point now where I'm also looking at getting more into producing, more having ownership, working with other directors. And of course, as a writer, that's the other thing which is always, paid the bills, is working as a writer separate from as a director. So I might not produce it, I might not direct it, but I still have scripts that are in development with awesome creative teams of people. So I find in order to survive, I literally got to have my fingers in multiple pots. Yeah. Again, while focusing on the movies that I would love to do, again, those are the ones that I can do through my own company.
So here, I was looking through some information today about the Canadian film industry, and I'm just gonna bring this up for a second. Here's a little trivia, or I'll ask you a couple of these questions here. Can you name a few of the top grossing Canadian films, not the most popular films?
Sure. I think it's funny because there's a lot to be said about in the 80s with the tax breaks we used to have. I mean, out of those, Cronenberg got his career. There's also one called Black Christmas. Yep. Bob Clark might be on that list. I'm thinking of some movies. Usually teen sex comedies have always done well, so Porky's is probably on that list. I think Porky's may have been Canadian. Yes. Is that on the list? It is on the list.
But yeah, I mean, and this is where I'm going with this, because I've always felt, people have said to me, that are not as involved or interested in where films get made, how TV series get made, and all this. I've always said to people, like, try to name me one Canadian film that you've seen in the last 10, let's just say 10 years. What was the last time you saw a Canadian film? Most people will not be able to answer that.
So international now. It's funny. There's so many Canadian movies that we don't know are actually Canadian, because it's so much is coming from some money that comes from the U.S. It could be like the U.S. distributor, U.S. sales agent putting up a bit of cash. Part of that mandate is that you have to hire that American as your number one in order to keep the tax credits. Your number two can be Canadian. Right. It's like, so it's some of them are so. it's very much a hybrid now, I find, with a lot of these films that are being done, other than, the straight up telefilm movies. That's the other way to go. Regional telefilm, as that's how I made Black Fly, and then how I made Drone. Drone, even though it's an American story ultimately, that is something that was born out of telefilm regional saying, hey, listen, we love Black Fly. We love what you want to say with this script with Drone. We're going to come on board, and that helped trigger everything.
Right. So for people who don't know how that works, you wrote a script, you presented it to telefilm.
Yes.
They said, we really like this.
Yes.
Where did
They'll give a letter of support. A letter of support stating that they will fund a chunk of money if we can package it together and complete our finance by a certain date.
Did any money come from the United States?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we got what happened was that we had Myriad, Kirk D'Amico, Myriad Entertainment. They came on board as a sales agent, and they were also able to front a chunk of money, basically a minimum guarantee, based on the fact that we got Sean Bean, and they knew that essentially they can get their money back.
Right.
So they provide the paperwork as well. So then we have basically a letter from them, then they're bankable. We have a letter from telefilm, obviously bankable, and they have a pull down, so we can get the money out of telefilm, and then we put together this house of cards, and then we got Super Channel, which is always good as well. Super Channel is how we made Black Fly.
Right.
They give a broadcast license, which you need in order to get your tax credits.
Okay.
So I've learned a lot basically on how to create that model. And it's definitely something that can be done for Canadian movies, especially when they can be Canadian movies that can hit a global audience and can be a little more audience friendly. It's funny though. It's like this one's very much it's a domestic thriller. Takes place mostly in suburbia. All takes place in one day, and it's very much about the ripple effects of death, and it's more of a psychological drama about two very damaged men. Sean Bean, being the drone pilot who's dealing with the death of his father, has to write the eulogy. He works for the CIA, which in itself is something that's just happened, where the CIA in the U.S. can now do their own drone strikes separate from the military. So these guys aren't in flight suits. It's not what we expect. It's more pop-up drone programs. Okay. It's quite a different take on it. And there's a WikiLeaks, and this Pakistani businessman tracks him down to the middle of suburbia because of this data leak, because he's convinced this drone pilot killed his wife and child through collateral damage.
Right.
So it's. I'll send you a link, Jake, if you want to check it out.
I totally do. No, I definitely want to see the film. So here, I'm going to go through this list really quick, okay? So this came out on Entertainment Tonight Canada, which we all know is got its finger on the pulse, or its finger up the bum of film and video. And oh my God, those shows gross me out. Everyone's just way too fucking pretty. By the way, this is an explicit show, and we have an 18 plus rating. So anything you want to say or do, you can go ahead and do it. The Dead Zone. David Cronenberg, one of my favorite Christopher Walken films of all time.
Awesome.
Number 10. So this list came out on June 16th, 2017. So The Dead Zone in 1983 with a box office total of $20 million. Okay, so Canadian director, American number one, shot in Canada, but supposed to take place in the United States. So this, again, if anybody watching this film anywhere in the world, they're going to think it's an American film because it's set in the United States for the most part. The whole thing is set in the United States. It actually talks about the presidency. Martin Sheen's in it, plays Greg Stilson, who's kind of a Trump character.
Yep, yeah, very much a Trump character, and based on Stephen King's novel. Yeah,
a brilliant novel, and I'm so glad that Cronenberg got his hands on it, because I don't think it would have been nearly as good if it had been made in the States by an American director. I love the film, but again, if you're watching it, most people are going to think, well, that's an American movie. Again, History of Violence, another Cronenberg film, starring Viggo Mortensen. I
love that movie.
Yeah, great film. Another great film. And Cronenberg obviously loves Vito, and another fantastic movie. Again, set in the United States, all about American gangsters, you'd never know that it was a Canadian director or shot in Canada. Again, here, can you remember? Here's another Cronenberg film, third out of 10, 1986. Can you tell me what film that is?
The Fly.
What's that?
The Fly?
You got it, The Fly. So that was $37 million. And again, David Cronenberg, he's in the top 10 3 times here. Shot in Toronto. Again, everybody in the world would think that it was shot in the United States because it's an American movie.
You know what's interesting about that one, though, is that their two leads are. I wonder how they work it. Tax credit wise, again, that's like Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah,
and that's still classified as a Canadian movie. I guess so.
With both American
Canadian director. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving right along, Brooklyn, which I haven't seen, just came out.
Loved it. Saw it at the opening of the Vancouver Film Festival a couple years back.
And that is a co-production.
Irish-Canadian co-pro.
Yes. Which I think, and I mean, I don't need to go through this entire list. I might throw up a couple more names here, but I think what I'm seeing more and more, and this is where I, hope you can bring some clarification. It has become about co-productions more than anything in the last 10 years. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah, there's projects we're looking at that are, especially with the UK, Ireland is big, Scotland is big. I think the co-pro market, the more funds that can be pulled out of different countries, the better. So I think the co-pro market right now is the way to go, especially when you look at the state of Canadian filmmaking in the sense that a lot of the broadcasters, I know it's a bit of a mess right now with Cavco and yeah, Canada's a weird kind of place to try to pull off something on a huge budget. I think we are in a situation, mostly based on our population as well, that we need to look outside of Canada to find those producing partners. And sometimes that doesn't involve the U.S. because the foreign market is such a huge market that needs to be fed.
Right. I'm getting to my ultimate question here. I'm going to go through a couple more movies real quick, and then I'm going to get to my ultimate question, which is, and I'll say it now, we can get there in a minute, but why the hell can't we make a Canadian movie that is about Canada that does well internationally or even domestically, for crying out loud? Okay, so number 6, 1979. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 9 years old, and I was living in Vancouver. I was in grade frickin' 3, and I walked across the bridge, the Cambie Street Bridge, from West 11th by City Hall. I walked into downtown Vancouver, and I went to the Capital 6 Theater by myself.
Was it 79? Was it like Meatballs?
You got it.
Change scheme. Meatballs.
Meatballs. Again, the greatest movie ever made about going to camp as a kid with the incomparable Bill Murray.
Ivan
Reitman. Great director, great film, funny still today, and you would think it was shot in Ontario at an actual summer camp, and $43 million it grossed, and it's still, again, you would think an American film. Most people watching it would think that it was an American film, completely American.
I'm kind of tempted to follow that model and do a summer camp movie, a good comedic summer camp movie based in the 80s, but in Canada, I think would be a blast.
Dude,
maybe New Brunswick. Not a lot of people think about New Brunswick.
I think you're right on top of it. There has not been a great summer camp, that real amazing. I mean, what was it? Chris Makepeace is in the sort of the lead role there after Bill Murray, about the kid who's kind of left behind, and it captured so much of what it was like to be young and to be left out of that inner circle at first, and the climb up. I mean, it was a very touching film. It had a huge heart, and it was funny. It was totally funny. Yes. Of course, I was 9 years old and thought everything was funny, but
probably, we got to do our Canadian version of that, Jake. We'll have like Northern Pipes, Grapes of Wrath.
Exactly.
We could have this awesome soundtrack of these 80s bands from that kicked ass in Canada. Throw in some Gowan. It's like it'll be awesome.
Oh God, got to have some Gowan.
Yeah,
and maybe one of the guys from Nickelback could be one of the counselors.
Oh, that'll be good.
Yeah.
But don't use their music, but just like have
Exactly.
cast.
All right. So you're not allowed to go out and make this movie now. Jason and I are making it, so we got to pay some people off. Okay, so The Hurricane, starring Denzel Washington, again, Canadian film. No one would ever think that was Canadian. Resident Evil Afterlife, shot in Canada as a Canadian-Germany co-production.
What's it called?
Resident Evil Afterlife.
Oh, of course, those are all Canadian. Yeah.
That was the fourth highest grossing Canadian film. Again, nobody would ever think in a million fucking years that Canadians had anything to do with it. Shooting
in Toronto. I know. It's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. But I do think there are. I've seen some Canadian movies that are very Canadian. Funny enough, they still have some UK or American cast. I always loved Margaret's Museum. Yeah, I love that movie. Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah,
based in Nova Scotia. I thought they knocked that out of the ballpark. So there are movies that I've seen that I think capture Canada pretty good. I mean,
let's get into that then. Let's get into that. What movies can you name a couple of movies that you've enjoyed that were Canadian made, Canadian director, mostly Canadian cast, and it was shot in Canada and it wasn't hidden. It was actually promoted or it was part of the film. We are in Canada.
Yeah, that would be like the movie out there, the Kokanee movie. That was very Canadian.
Yeah,
it was shot it all up in Whistler. That literally was a brand.
No shit, that was a big commercial.
They made the Kokanee movie kind of like in the same vein as Ski Patrol and Hot Tub and all of those that they actually made in the 80s up in Whistler as American movies. The fact that they made the Canadian version of those kind of like those ski teen sex comedies.
Yep, Ski School and Hot Tub. You got it. I remember watching those.
Yeah, all those. The other ones, of course, that come to mind is anything by Paul Gross. Sarah Polley has always stuck to Canada, and Away From Her, I think, was Canadian, based in Canada, kicked ass.
Yes.
So she's certainly carved out her niche. And I think, but Paul Gross is an interesting one because I'm not a fan of him as a filmmaker, but I can say that hey, when Men with Brooms, they flew that cast, they hit every province when they were out promoting that movie. It was again, I'm not a huge fan of the movie, but I mean that's about as Canadian as you can get, I think, with Men with Brooms.
Well, I agree. If it's about hockey or curling. Okay, that's about as fucking Canadian as it can get.
Hello Destroyer, which is I think that Kevin Funk, who directed that, has been like that movie. I hope it has a life outside of Canada, but that's an example of one that came out recently and about hockey. But I mean, that's as Canadian as you can get. I think they shot it up in Prince George, small town, and just nailed it. They had an awesome cast.
Well, and again though. These films don't do well internationally. They don't do well domestically. They don't make any money. I think if I go back to the Wikipedia, problems with the Canadian film industry. There's an interesting quote here. It says that they were looking at case studies for Porky's and Meatballs for many of the most Canadian success. Okay, so Porky's is the number 2 most successful Canadian film ever made, still to this day, and My Big Fat Greek Wedding is the number 1. Mm-hmm. Again, not set anywhere near Canada. It was a play, and I think the only reason it got as big as it did was because it was produced. Wasn't it produced by Tom Hanks and his
him and his wife teamed
him
up
and his
on
wife, right? So it had huge publicity, it had great marketing. These are the things that the United States do better, really, than anybody other than maybe Bollywood, where they promote and they put so much marketing behind their films. I know I'm a little bit all over the place here. I'll try to get to it. There are great Canadian films made all the time. French-speaking Canadian films, French-speaking
Bad Cop, Good Cop. I mean, and some of those ones are Bad Cop, Good Cop.
Yes. They did great domestically. In Quebec, there is a huge film industry, domestic industry, where French-speaking Canadians go and watch French-speaking films, and they support their infrastructure and they support that industry, they do well all year round, every year.
Well, the biggest issue is what you're reading. It's just archaic. I mean, it's because it's a lost leader now to look at theatrical movies as the end all and be all of movie success. The biggest movies that I've been involved in, let's use Drone as an example. Drone probably made about $6,000 at the Canadian box office. That's it. That being said, I think it hit in the first week, it hit about 2,000 downloads off of iTunes. It opened in the U.S., and this is a regional telefilm movie. It opened in the U.S. On iTunes as the number 1 indie and the number 2 thriller. So it's like, and again, that's it's drones, it's an American topic, but it's a movie that's certainly, it's getting out there. We sold it to over 25 territories. So there's something to be said about VOD, and I think especially with Netflix and there's Canadian movies that are out there, and I do find an audience. You just can't compare it to theatrical, because theatrical is driven by P&A. It's prints and ads. Where if I was to get Drone out and get those numbers up, say instead of making 5,000, if we wanted it to really promote it truly, we got to buy advertising on television.
Right.
And to do that, we had a very low budget. We were under 2 million Canadian. In order for us to do that, we would probably need about 5 million just in prints and ads just to compete.
Right.
In that market. That's the number one thing. It's literally prints and ads.
Yeah.
It's how do you get it out there in order for people to really get excited? And of course, you got to make a good movie. So again, those numbers for me don't mean a heck of a lot, because it's the theatrical. It's a lost leader, and telefilm and those stats haven't let go of that yet, and they haven't adapted to this new world of video platforms. VOD, I think, is certainly the way to go. I'm looking at making the majority of our money back on Drone. It's all about VOD, and that market's changed in the last 5 years.
Right.
It still comes out on DVD, still comes out on Blu-ray, like a lot of these Canadian movies do, but I think you can have a very good success just on video platforms, and I think that should be included.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a different world. We're not talking about, there's only 2 movie theaters and everything you're going to see, you have to go to the movie theater to see. There's so much content out there.
This is the thing, too. Get this. Like the way it works now with theatrical in the market, when you do Canadian movies and you get theatrical, it's literally there just to promote it to VOD, because that's the advertising. It's like the festivals. And that market's changed, and not a lot of people have adapted to that, and the stats haven't adapted to that. So, for example, when we did 10 cities with Drone in the U.S., that was specifically to get a Netflix sale, and that drove it, because we suddenly were theatrical. Is going to make any money in the U.S.? Hell no. I mean, we're going up against Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean and The Rock in that big bomb of a movie. What was it? They did like the TV version of Baywatch. That was my competition that weekend, Memorial Day. How could I possibly compete with my under 2 million Canadian regional movie? But holy man, that totally helped drive it, just by having it in a newspaper, just by it being out there on those lists. It was on the front page of IMDb. That's what drove it for VOD sales. Right. So it's so that's what it is now. I think theatricals, they're more for, it becomes a P&A. It becomes a way of promotion rather than a way of looking at. You can't look at it just like as a moneymaker, because any Canadian movie, it's almost impossible to knock it out of the ballpark unless, as you said, it's based in Quebec. If it's based in Quebec, it's a French, which again, Drone, we ended up doing a French version, which helped our sale to France. But we actually sold it to TVA in Quebec, and we did a French version of it. So I think Quebec's its own little thing when it comes to theatrical, and it's amazing that the support is there to make 2 million or 3 million at the box office is fantastic. Yeah. So that's my rant on how the new system works compared to, again, holding theatrical up as the end all and be all. Right. And no, I mean, the way people are watching movies and going out and getting their content is totally different now. Video on demand, all the digital channels, the specialty channels, all of the... It's hard to judge it now. Telefilm Telefilm still holds on to theatrical, though. They haven't adapted as quickly as I would have expected. So even with Drone, they look at a score on how Drone did in those theaters in order for us to have an envelope of development finance triggered. That's still geared towards, again, more towards theatrical and how it did, which is, my God, that's tough. But, it's certainly an industry success story, and it's a movie that, when you think about it, it's probably going to be one of the few regional telefilm movies that actually makes telefilm a profit.
So, in a nutshell, unless a Canadian production company, let's say, co-producing something with maybe even two other countries, let's say Germany and Ireland, get involved with Canadian producer. It's a Canadian story. It's set in Canada. There's money coming in. You got Canadian writer, Canadian director, Canadian cast. It's set in Vancouver. It's all about the let's just say it's all about the 1970s and 1980s punk rock scene in BC. It's a great road movie about a band on the road, kind of like what was that?
Yeah, Hardcore Logo.
The only way that film is going to do well theatrically in Canada and outside Canada is if they pump millions and millions of dollars into advertising.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
I think so. You need to have an ad up and on, especially, and it might not be, when we talk about prints and ads, that now is like, having a banner on IMDb.
Right.
So again, that's changed.
It's not the cover of the Times Colonist or the back page of the Times Colonist, right? It's social media, it's web.
Exactly.
Right. So
social media is the biggest way to obviously promote. And we had, again, I used Drone as an example. I mean, that's a regional telefilm movie. The first review that came out was New York Times. So it's, there's a lot to be said about going through, again, social media, going through we had a very good publicist on board that in order to aim that high with those reviews and create that much of a stir. So it's it can be done. But again, I know that one, that was very specific. When I was making it, I knew that we were focusing on, yes, it's a Canadian movie, but it does have this American contingent, and it's dealing with a global controversy, which certainly helped drive sales.
Do you think that there's anything in the bureaucracy or the rules behind our funding agencies here in Canada that would handcuff that would keep it, say, hey, listen, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're getting too big. We want to keep that domestic. We don't want you to make any money. We want you to just pay.
No, not at all. I mean, I think times have changed. I think with telefilm as well, and the films that I've been involved in with telefilm, they want to open it up to a global market, but ideally hold on to that Canadian identity.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly the way to go. I mean, I'm part of the indie scene, so I'm working with writers and directors and producers that do Canadian content. They have their movies, they go out, they do festivals, and and hell, it could be some of them that are even that have been done in Victoria, and definitely BC. But as we know, there's a ton of them being done back east. And who's to say if one of those is going to be hit out of the ballpark, and that can happen. I think there are good examples. The Cube. Cube was a Canadian sci-fi movie, spawned bunch of other films. Yes, it's sci-fi. It doesn't take place necessarily in Canada, but that was a huge success internationally. I'm surprised it's not on that list. The other movies that come to mind, these are full-on Canadian franchises. The other one is the Ginger Snaps. Ginger Snaps did 3 movies.
Well.
Yeah. And again, it's wonderfully done, good visual effects. Still to this day, globally in the horror market is kicking ass.
Yeah.
We have Canadian filmmakers. We have like the Soska sisters, American Mary, great global success. Yes, it's more of a niche. It's the horror market. But and they've since gone on to do like WWE action movies, their own Elevator TV series. They're born out of Vancouver. They're born out of BC, and they've made a mark globally. And I suspect, actually, funny enough, I think they were going to be doing Rabid, Cronenberg's movie from the 80s, and they were going to do a remake in Montreal. So those are all movies that do, that something like that I think will do very well in the global market.
Yeah.
Residue is one that just came out, again done by BC filmmakers that a lot of people are talking about. Candyland is another one.
I got one for you.
Films, I think it's all, honestly, I think Canadian film is alive and well, and it's just not, you're not finding it where you would expect to find it.
Right.
I think in the genre of filmmaking, indie scene, I think Canadians are actually kicking butt globally. And again, they're not big movies, but my God, they're getting a decent fan base.
I got one for you, actually. The Void.
Oh, The Void. Yes, The Void is the same distributor as Drone. We ended up going through, so that's Screen Media. I think The Void's a damn good example.
Have you seen it?
No, I've heard a lot of great things about it, though.
It is fucking awesome. This was the example I was telling people about. I was saying, this is Canada on the map. This is a great, so it's the details, country, Canada, language, English, filming location, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the budget, it made, Jesus Christ, in box office in the United States, it made $30,000. Gross, it made $150,000 in the United States. And then I see the movie, and I would hands down say it is probably one of the best horror films made in the last 20 years. It's that fucking good.
And you know what? Something like that, again, theatrical, when I hear those numbers, that's actually good considering their budget probably was, who knows, it's probably under $2 million. And I suspect something along those type of lines, that's a movie that would kick ass globally, kick ass at festivals, and make all its money off of VOD.
Yep. And it doesn't promote Canada, but it doesn't not promote it. And it doesn't promote the United States. It doesn't go around saying, hey, we're in Columbus, Ohio, everyone.
It is interesting, though. I mean, there are these movies, and I think Void's one. I kind of did somewhat of a version of that in Blackfly, where Blackfly is a very Canadian movie based in the 80s, but at the same time, I didn't exactly say where it was based.
Right.
And I think that's sort of, where you don't exactly name the town, you don't name the city, and that maybe that does help a little bit when it comes down to sales for the U.S. I think if it took place in a rural, if it's like someone reads the DVD description in the U.S. and it says it takes place in New Brunswick, I'm not sure if that would impact or not. It's and I come back to being blessed that I could work on this Medina series, because we had actors. I didn't know they were going to be on it, but I'm in Qatar. Rick Ravanello shows up. He's born in Nova Scotia. Tom O'Pennicott, who I worked on back and Under the Cover for CBC and Zed. He's now gone on to work with Joss Whedon and Dollhouse and Battlestar Galactica, and he turned up, and I'm doing scenes with Tom O'Pennicott. He's a Canadian actor, and we happen to be like deep in the Middle East filming this scene. And
awesome.
I think that it's as I mentioned earlier about this movie shot in this Palestinian Israeli movie, and suddenly I'm talking to the actors, and we happen to work with the same people. In Traverse City, Michigan. So I do think it's becoming more and more global, and especially in Canada, we are looking at more and more of these co-productions. I think that's a huge way to make bigger movies, and a lot of companies are specifically looking for those UK, Scottish, New Zealand, Australian co-pros. I'm working on one now that's an Australian co-pro.
Do we need another movie about curling?
No.
Is it time?
No, I think honestly, Paul Gross put the nail in the coffin with that curling movie.
No, he's not going to do Men with Brooms 2, or did he do it 2? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
I don't know. I was pretty disappointed when I saw that. Tonally, it was all over the map. Did you see Passchendaele? It's no gun.
You know what? I didn't, and my grandfather was in the second. I feel like I should see it because it's a Canadian story, but I did not see it.
I heard his last one was not too bad. Was it Jackal Road or something? The one in Afghanistan. Anyway, but again, Paul Gross has made a lot of movies, and he's gotten a lot of funding through Canada. So that, all I can do is pat him on the back. Hey, congratulations. I just wish, from my end, there were movies that I liked more.
What's next for the director, the producer, Jason Bourque? What's next on the horizon?
A few things in development. One is an Australian co-pro. It's a Civil War werewolf movie I've been dying to do, called Wolves of War. It's a great script. We're dealing with the guys over in Australia. It's just something that I think would be a blast and a nice hybrid. Another one called 14, about a hitman who's reincarnated as a 14-year-old, kind of like Gross Point Blank, meets Kick-Ass. So that's one that I've been working on with some American producers, and my own kind of like The Void called Iris that I've been dying to do. All takes place at an ER at night during a hurricane. So that's one which, again, got the script, got my little package for it. That'll be a little Canadian low-budget supernatural thriller that I've been dying to do. So just talking with some investment on that one. So like I said, it's like what we're talking about. It's the hustle. It's keeping my fingers in multiple pots. And, of course, the big thing would be, and they all sound big, but I'd love to go back to the Middle East. And I'm hoping to do another season of Medina. We'll find out soon if it's being picked up by Netflix, Hulu, but very proud of working on that show. If you go on Facebook, if you look up Medina Show on Twitter, you'll be able to see clips of it and the character intros and some trailer work, and just get a feel for it, because I do think it's quite special. So hopefully some announcements on that soon. We've only just completed literally the first episode we premiered. Yeah. We still got to tweak it a tiny bit. And again, like third and fourth episode, we're just picture locking now. So there's still quite a bit of work to do, especially with the visual effects.
Well, that's it. The interview with Jason Bourque, the episode with Jason Bourque. I'm doing the extra of that particular interview almost 3 months after it was done. So I really apologize to Jason. Podcasting is, I thought this was going to be super easy. Then I started editing, and then I started adding music, and I started doing all of these other elements to it, and I created a fucking huge amount of work for myself. I think what I'm going to try and do from now on is just put out the live stuff. I'm going to record directly to camera, and I will have video of the interviewee and whoever I'm talking to for whatever reason. And we'll just do it live, and we'll just get it out there, because if I take too long editing, it just turns into a ton of work, and I'm never happy with it. And then 3 months goes by. Looking forward to this next episode, which I hope will probably be about film again, because that's what I've been doing. Just finished working on the best project that I've ever been part of. A film that shot here in Souk from September through to the middle of October. I am very, very proud to say I was part of this project. And I can't wait to see what the director, who is the writer, who is, I'm sure, editing the entire project as well, does with this film. It involved some really, really, really well-known actors, and it was great to work on something that had a heart and a soul, with people who were all very aware of how special the project was as we were doing it. And we shot in Souk. The whole project shot in Souk, in the middle of nowhere. Some days, most days, we were in the middle of nowhere. And we saw bears. I saw 5 bears total. And I'll tell you more about that on episode 4, when we talk to our very special guest, who was from that project. Won't say exactly how. But thanks for listening to Take Warning with Jake Warren, episode 3, In the Bag. I'm out.